Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cone back here again today with another video. Weird free agency move going down in the middle of August. Lauri Markkanen finally getting signed by a team in a sign-and trade deal to the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is not the destination I saw coming for him at all. The move really doesn't make sense to me. I'll start with the other teams because I want to talk about Cleveland the most. What Chicago gets back in what turned into a three-team deal between the Cavaliers, the Bulls, and the Portland Trailblazers. The Chicago Bulls get Derrick Jones Jr. from the Portland Trailblazers, as well as a first-round pick and a second-round pick. That's a pretty solid return for a guy that they weren't going to bring back. Gives them a wing player, which they kind of needed for their bench, in Derrick Jones Jr., who has shown some flashes of being productive. If he's able to stay in the rotation, I think he can make an impact. High flyer, alongside Zach LaVine, two dunk contest champions. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch those lobs with Lonzo Ball in Chicago, which even adds more to the fun factor of Chicago, alongside just the fact that they're going to be a really good team. So I like it for Chicago. He's not a guy that was in their long-term plans. He didn't want to be there. They didn't want him there anymore. It makes sense to move on from him. And if you get a solid player, a player that can fit in your rotation, and a first-round pick alongside a second-round pick just for the hell of it, that's a good return for a guy that you didn't even want to keep in the first place. For the Trailblazers, who are maybe my biggest winners of this entire move, who just kind of got involved out of nowhere, they pick up Larry Nance Jr. Derrick Jones Jr. kind of fell out of the rotation at points last season, and Larry Nance Jr. I think fits so much better. Derrick Jones Jr. was definitely an odd man out since Tony Snell came in, and now he's probably going to be their backup three, excuse me. So, they needed someone to play a backup big now that Zach Collins is gone, and he was never really even available anyways. So now they've got a guy in Larry Nance Jr. that can both play defense, he can stretch the floor, he's a good pick and pop or pick and roll partner with Damian Lillard, and he's just going to be able to catch some lobs and play some defense, which is something that this team has desperately lacked. They've low-key had a decent offseason. I still don't think it's anything to make them like a contender, but Larry Nance was huge for Cleveland last year when he was able to play. The biggest issue for this trade for the Blazers is going to be if Larry Nance Jr. can stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, this is a great move for them. Getting rid of a guy in Derrick Jones Jr., you did have to give up a pick as well, which is fair. But when you're trying to keep Damian Lillard and getting this team better, it makes sense. You really don't care about keeping that pick. So I like it for the Blazers. I think this is a move that's going to kind of fly under the radar and come like February, March, when the Blazers are trying to make a push up in the Western Conference and they're having a better season than most people expected them to have. Larry Nance Jr. might be a part of the reason for that if he stays healthy, giving them that front court defense and just being an all-around solid player. He was one of the Cavs' better players last season, and I think people forget how good he is because he's not really a big name and he really, I guess, isn't that young anymore, as well as the fact that he just couldn't really stay on the court at times. I like this a lot for the Blazers. Good on them for getting involved in this, and I think they made their team better over the course of this offseason. This was probably my favorite move that they made, and it came out of the middle of nowhere. So shout out to the Blazers for getting that move done. And now the Cleveland Cavaliers. Lauri Markkanen's contract is 4 years, $67 million. That's a lot of money for a guy in Lauri Markkanen who didn't show much this past season. He's kind of been getting worse as he's moved on in his career. And he also is struggling with injury issues similar to Larry Nance Jr. He hasn't been able to stay on the court all the time. I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me, especially when you just signed Jared Allen, who you see as your franchise center, to a $20 million a year contract this offseason. He's going to be making $20 million for the next 5 years. That's a pretty large contract. Not to mention, you still have Kevin Love's money on the books, which you're not going to be able to get rid of. They're going to have to cut him, and therefore that just becomes dead money that you're going to have to pay. So that's more money. You just drafted Evan Mobley, and as a top 3 pick, he's going to be making around $10 million a season for the next few years before eventually you're going to have to pay him really big money in like 3 off seasons down the line. Also, Colin Sexton is someone that there's been rumors that the Cavs want to keep, but they've got to give him money. If it's not an extension before this season rolls around, they've got to give him money this next offseason. And now you've got Lauri Markkanen making around $16.5 million per year on the books when you haven't even given Sexton an extension. Not to mention, Darius Garland is going to start to come up for one soon too. Garland is a guy that it looks like he's poised for a big season. I think Darius Garland's going to have a really good year. He went from being what a lot of people saw as one of the worst players in the league in his first season, and yeah, he wasn't very good, to a really solid player this past year. And I think he's going to continue getting better. And I think he does look like maybe your point guard of the future if that development does continue to progress that way. And so you're going to have to pay him a lot of money too soon. So now you've got Jarrett Allen, $20 million. Evan Mobley, who I'm a huge believer in. So I don't even like the fact that they're crowding that front court, adding Lauri Markkanen. I hope Mobley doesn't get benched. I'll talk about that in a second, but I want to focus on the finances. Jarrett Allen, $20 million. Evan Mobley around $10 million. I'm not sure on his exact contract. Colin Sexton is going to be looking for $25 million plus probably. So unless they're moving him, that's more money. That's almost all of your cap space already tied up. Not to mention that Garland needs to be extended. Isaac Okoro, if you want to keep him, might be looking for a little bit of money down the line if he develops. It just doesn't make sense to me. I feel like Cleveland is trying to do too many things at once. Focus on what you've got. I get it. You wanted to bring Lauri Markkanen, who maybe has a higher ceiling than Larry Nance Jr. If Lauri Markkanen is able to somewhat return to what we've seen from him in the past, before he kind of had this decline, if he's able to maybe find some way to guard people because he can't really play defense at this point, and for a team that doesn't have a lot of great defenders, losing Larry Nance Jr., perhaps your best defender, for a guy who can't guard anyone at the same position, it doesn't look good for your defense trying to prevent points. Not to mention that he might stunt the growth of Evan Mobley, who you just drafted him 3rd overall. And if you have been with me on this channel, if you follow my Twitter account, in which if you don't, you should go do that, you know that I'm a huge Evan Mobley guy. Mobley was one of my favorite prospects in this entire draft class. I thought he is a genuine, in like most other draft classes, Mobley would have gone number 1 overall. That's how good he is. I think he could be like an Anthony Davis type. You don't stunt his development by bringing in a guy in Lauri Markkanen, who now you've paid $16.5 million a year. So you're probably going to have to bench Mobley because what? You signed Lauri Markkanen for $16.5 million a year to be your bench piece? That doesn't make sense. And if Lauri Markkanen isn't able to get healthy, or he isn't able to kind of return to the level that we've seen him play like in the past, his contract is quickly going to become an albatross. And now you've got the same situation, which, given it's not as much money as Kevin Love is making now, but you have a similar situation where you've got a big that's crowding your front court for developing players that you feel like you've got to play because you're paying him all this money. And you might not be able to move on from him. So that's another situation they're going to have to worry about in the future. I just don't really understand it. His biggest plus, Lauri Markkanen, it's supposed to be his floor spacing, and he hasn't even been a good floor spacer these past couple seasons. So what is the point? I don't understand why they're paying him this much money to come in and play a position that they just drafted someone for. 3rd overall. Typically, what you'll see teams do is they'll have an established player at a position, but they'll be in a rebuild, so they'll draft someone anyways, because you pick best player available always, especially with like a top 3 pick. So if the situation was where they had Lauri Markkanen first and then they drafted Evan Mobley, I would get it because Lauri Markkanen has kind of shown some signs of not quite being the player maybe he was a season ago. So you'd bring in Evan Mobley to maybe be your power forward of the future and eventually take the reins from Lauri. What I don't understand is drafting a guy first at 3rd overall that looks like he can fit great next to Jarrett Allen as your power forward of the future. Like, I think he could be an Anthony Davis type player, and then bringing in a guy to take minutes from him. I saw people say that, it's not that big of a deal because like Lauri Markkanen and him, like they'll just both play like right around 30 minutes or so. That's not going to work. You have other players you've got to give minutes to. Jarrett Allen, Lauri Markkanen, Evan Mobley, someone's going to kind of get shafted in this rotation. And if it's Lauri Markkanen that doesn't play much, why'd you give him so much money? And if it's Evan Mobley who doesn't play that much, then why did you draft him 3rd overall, or why did you bring in Lauri Markkanen to take minutes from him? I hope they don't bench Evan Mobley. I get it. A lot of rookies come... This is something I tweeted out earlier that I hope they don't bench Evan Mobley, and people are like, why not? Rookies come off the bench all the time. Because I feel like Evan Mobley fits great in that starting lineup, and I think it's going to be best for his development if he plays alongside those starters. I don't think drafting a number 1 overall caliber guy and playing him off the bench is a great idea. It's totally possible that this move works out. There is a timeline where, say, Lauri Markkanen returns to the level that we've seen of him in the past. He turns into a great floor spacer. Maybe he even improves defensively. But does that mean now he's going to be your 6th man? Because Evan Mobley isn't going to stay on the bench forever. And if so, why are you paying this much money for a 6th man this early in your rebuild? You don't even know if this core is going to work. There's a timeline where Evan Mobley busts. And then even the Lauri Markkanen thing doesn't work out and Evan Mobley doesn't play well. There's a timeline where Colin Sexton and Darius Garland don't develop well, and you've now put so much money into this group, especially if you re-sign Sexton like a lot of Cavs fans think they're going to. And if you don't give Sexton this money, I don't think he's gonna want to come back next season. He's been very adamant about wanting an extension. I'm just confused at what the Cavs are doing. It doesn't make sense to me. I was someone who I have been super high on this Cavaliers core, and I think they have a ton of talent. Lauri Markkanen has a super high ceiling if he's able to return to that. I just don't really like paying this price for him when you've already got guys at that position. Especially two guys that you're banking your future on. A third overall pick in this year's draft. He hasn't even played a game for them yet. And Jarrett Allen, who you just signed for $20 million a season. It doesn't make sense to me. If you're a Cavs fan, let me know what you think about this. If you're just any fan, let me know what you think about this. Am I right? Am I wrong? Either one, let me know in the comment section below, because like I said, it's totally possible I'm wrong. Maybe there's a timeline where Darius Garland balls out next season, Sexton balls out, Lauri Markkanen turns into a good signing, and just they become an incredible core. And I think they do have a ton of talent. I like Garland a lot. Like I said, I think he's going to break out. I've talked about Mobley extensively on this channel because I like his game a lot, and I think he's going to be a stud. Jarrett Allen is a solid center. Colin Sexton's a great scorer. I think Isaac Okoro's got potential. I like what they're doing in Cleveland. This just is the first move that really doesn't make sense. And it feels like they're trying to do too much too early. You're not competing for anything yet. You're just not. This team's not good enough. The East is really, really good this season. You're not going to make the playoffs. I don't even think they're going to get close to the play-in tournament. There are way too many teams that are better than them right now for that to happen. So why are you committing this much money? If this was a couple years down the line where the Cavs are in the playoffs and they sign a Lauri Markkanen thinking he can be a solid bench piece for us and we can bring him in and help him, or he can help us if he returns to form, compete for a championship, then that makes more sense, but not in a rebuild. And in addition, who else was bidding for him? Did you really have to pay this much money, or was this just his asking price and you went with it? I don't know what to think about this. It's super weird to me. I'm super confused by the move. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. What do you think about how the other teams made out? I think the Bulls did great. I like what the Bulls did. I think the Blazers might have even been the winners of this trade. I love what they did. And let me know what you think about the Cavs situation. So I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you guys later. Everyone say it back.